There is a certain way of being noticed that has nothing to do with the person you originally thought you needed to be seen by. It comes from a direction you never expected, from someone you never tried to impress, someone whose attention you didn't even consider important in that moment. It might be a mother, sitting quietly at a family gathering during Easter, watching how her son behaves differently when you are part of his life. You were not performing for her approval, not trying to win her favor, not even aware that you were being studied at all. And yet, in the middle of a conversation you were never included in, a judgment forms about you. Something is said about you that was never meant for your ears, but life has a way of delivering such things anyway, through indirect paths that carry emotional weight until they eventually find you.
However it arrives, it still arrives. The words spoken about you at that Easter table eventually reach you, and something within you begins to shift. It is not a loud breakdown or a sudden moment of clarity where everything makes sense at once. It is far quieter, more internal than that. It feels like the atmosphere inside you subtly changes, almost like a room when someone has entered without making a sound. The part of you that has long carried the question of whether you truly matter starts to respond, not with answers or certainty, but with a quiet rearrangement. Something inside you settles differently, and you can no longer ignore what has now reached you. I want you to understand what truly changed within you and why it holds more meaning than you may be ready to admit right now. Stay with me through this. On the Jung Code, this space is made for the woman who is beginning to see the full shape of the story she is living inside of. The woman who is slowly realizing that the clearest reflections of who she is often don't come from the person she is trying to reach, but from the people standing around that person, observing the effect she has on them. If this is your first time here, make sure you subscribe, because what we talk about here is meant for those quiet moments when something inside you starts to understand itself in a new way. Easter becomes one of those rare moments in family life where truth appears without being carefully edited or controlled. It is not that people intentionally decide to be more honest, but rather that the setting naturally allows unfiltered thoughts to slip out. Around the table, between conversations, people speak about those who are absent in ways they would never say directly to their face. In that space, impressions are both formed and revealed at the same time. So when something about you reaches you from that environment, especially from someone observing your influence on a person you care about deeply, it carries a different kind of weight. It stops feeling like just an opinion and starts feeling like a reflection you were never meant to see but cannot unsee once it reaches you. Not because the holiday carries any deliberate lesson about openness or honesty that people consciously follow, but because Easter is, in essence, a season of return. It is the time when people who love each other but do not always share daily space come back into the same rooms, around the same table, inside the same older, deeper version of their relationships. The version that existed long before adulthood taught everyone how to edit themselves, how to filter their words, how to carefully manage the impression they leave behind. And in that older atmosphere, in the warmth and loosened structure of an Easter gathering that has been repeated over years, things begin to surface on their own. Conversations drift into territory that would normally stay unspoken. Feelings that have been quietly held start to find air. Truth doesn't need to be forced out there. It simply finds the openings that the moment creates and passes through them. In that kind of environment, mothers become a very specific kind of presence, especially a mother at an Easter table, watching not just her child, but what her child becomes around certain people. She is observing the emotional shifts, the subtle changes in expression, the way her son's or daughter's inner world reacts in the presence of someone important to them. She has been doing this for a long time, not in a formal or intentional way, but through years of closeness that makes noticing almost automatic. She sees what excites them, what unsettles them, what softens them, and what quietly pulls them apart from themselves. Over time, she begins to form a silent understanding about the people who enter her child's emotional life, including you, not based on assumptions, but on accumulated observation, the kind that builds slowly and steadily until it becomes impossible to ignore. And Easter, with its relaxed atmosphere and familiar faces, becomes the moment where what has been quietly understood finally finds words. In that space, she may say something about you, not casually, and not without weight, but as a reflection of everything she has witnessed from her place beside someone she has known since before they could even fully define their own emotions. What she says carries the full presence of her attention, the years of watching how her child responds to your influence, how your presence settles into their inner world, and what shifts in them when you are part of their life. It is not a passing opinion formed in a moment of conversation. It is the result of long, careful noticing that has finally reached expression. This is where the deeper idea emerges, what we can call the testimony of the witness. It is a form of being seen that does not come directly from the person you are trying to reach, but from someone standing beside them, someone who knows them so deeply that they can recognize what lives beneath their surface. A mother often represents the clearest version of this witness, not because she is always right, but because her attention has been continuous, intimate, and rooted in a lifetime of emotional familiarity. She knows her child in a way no outside perspective can match, including the patterns they repeat, the emotions they hide, and the ways they change when someone truly affects them. So when she looks at you, she is not only seeing who you present yourself to be, but also what her child becomes in response to you. The versions you consciously offer, the carefully adjusted way you behave in connection, the effort to be understood or accepted, all of that is seen through a deeper layer of recognition. What she registers is the impact, the emotional consequence, the subtle but lasting effect your presence has on someone she knows more intimately than anyone else in the world, the version of you that changed how her child moved through the world, even in the moments when they never openly admitted that anything had changed. The version of you that lived not just in what was said, but in what was avoided, hinted at, or silently carried. She noticed how her child's energy shifted after interacting with you, how their mood sometimes softened or tightened in ways that didn't need explanation, even if no one ever named the reason out loud. Whether your presence was recent or distant, spoken about or carefully left unspoken, it still left traces in the way they carried themselves through ordinary days, and she saw all of it. Every phase, every shift, every return, every withdrawal. Nothing escaped her attention because her attention was not casual. It was consistent, patient, and deeply rooted in love. At that Easter table, she finally spoke. Say, "The witness spoke" in the comments, because that is exactly what this was. A witness who had been quietly building an understanding over time, not through judgment, but through long observation, finally found the moment where what she knew inside herself had space to be expressed. And when it came out, it wasn't new. It was already complete within her long before it was ever said. It just finally had a place to land. And when it landed, it didn't stay contained in that room. It reached you. Not randomly, but in the way certain truths seem to travel when they have been waiting for the right moment to be understood. Now let me make it clearer what she was actually seeing all this time, because understanding that is what gives weight to what she eventually said. She noticed it in the smallest details first, the things most people would overlook. The way her child's voice subtly changed when your name entered a conversation, not in an obvious or dramatic way, but in a quiet adjustment, like someone carefully managing what they feel without fully succeeding. There was a shift in tone, a slight hesitation before or after your name, as if even the timing of the word carried something unsaid. It wasn't just language, it was emotional leakage, the kind that happens when something matters more than the speaker is willing to reveal. She recognized that pattern early and remembered it. She didn't interrupt it or question it. She simply stored it, the way someone stores small pieces of a larger picture they are slowly learning to see. Over time, she began noticing the rhythm of your presence in her child's life through mood itself. There were days when everything felt lighter, when connection seemed warm and present, and then there were days when distance took over, when something felt contained, tightened, almost carefully controlled. She knew that contraction well. She had seen it before in her child, long before you entered the picture, back when emotions were still unfiltered and visible. So when she saw a similar pattern emerge around you, she recognized it immediately, not as something imagined, but as something familiar in its emotional structure. She never confronted it. She never turned it into a conversation. Instead, she added it to her growing understanding, detail by detail, moment by moment, until it became impossible for her not to see the full pattern forming. She also noticed what wasn't said, the way your name sometimes didn't appear where it naturally should have, the way conversations carefully stepped around certain subjects without ever admitting they were being avoided. That kind of silence is never empty. It carries weight, and she heard it clearly. Not as absence, but as something shaped, something intentional, something that revealed just as much as spoken words ever could. She understood the silence completely. She had been living alongside her child's silences long enough to recognize their shape, their weight, and what they were protecting. So when this new silence appeared, this one connected to you, she did not question it or treat it as unfamiliar. She simply added it to everything she already knew. Because for her, understanding was never about single moments. It was always about accumulation. She saw it again in the way her child spoke about the future. In the periods where things between you remained unresolved, there was a subtle flattening in their language, as if they were carefully constructing a version of life that deliberately avoided something essential. Even their sense of possibility felt adjusted, as though certain hopes were being spoken around rather than spoken into. She noticed that absence not as confusion, but as meaning, and she kept it. Then Easter came. The table was set. The people who have known each other the longest gathered again in the same space where relationships return to their oldest form, less managed, less filtered, more honest in ways that everyday life rarely allows. In that softened atmosphere where conversation flows more freely and emotional defenses loosen without anyone realizing it, what has been quietly carried often finds its voice, not because it is forced, but because it is finally no longer contained. And in that moment she spoke about you, not casually, not lightly, but with the full weight of everything she had observed over time. The shifts, the silences, the emotional patterns, the presence you had in her child's inner world across every season of your connection. What came out of her was not a passing remark. It was the release of something that had already been fully formed through long, patient observation. It was the truth she had been holding finally arriving in speech because the moment allowed it. Now it is important to understand what it means when something like that is said about you in this way. Because you have not been living inside this connection from a place of certainty. You have been living inside it with questions about your significance, your impact, your place in the emotional reality of the other person, not because you were weak or insecure, but because the feedback you received was never fully complete. There were moments of warmth, moments of distance, moments of clarity, and moments of emotional ambiguity, that left space for doubt to exist. And that kind of emotional inconsistency creates a very specific kind of inner tension, where you continue to feel something deeply, but cannot always confirm how fully it is being received on the other side. That is where the significance of her testimony enters, because what a mother says in that context is not casual interpretation. It is not social politeness or surface-level observation. It is the result of long-term witnessing from the closest possible vantage point. Someone who has seen her child before emotional defenses, before carefully constructed distance, and before anything had to be managed or controlled. She has been watching how you exist inside her child's life through every phase of the connection, including the ones you were never directly aware were being observed. So when she speaks about you, it carries the weight of sustained recognition, not momentary opinion. And yet, this is where the meaning must be held carefully, because her words are not instruction, and they are not a direction. They are not something you are meant to act upon immediately in the context of the connection. They are something more fundamental than that. They are confirmation, not of what you should do next, but of what has already been real, of the fact that what you brought into this connection was not invisible, not insignificant, and not unregistered. It was seen, it was felt, and it left a trace that even distance and silence could not erase. So the most important shift is not outward, it is inward. It is the quiet recognition that the uncertainty you were carrying was never a measure of absence of meaning, but of absence of confirmation. And now for the first time, that confirmation has come from a place that cannot easily be dismissed, because it was never trying to convince you of anything. It was simply describing what it observed over time. In the season where truth naturally finds its voice, let this be enough for today. Not as the ending of your story, but as the arrival of a missing piece you didn't know you were still waiting for. The piece that quietly confirms what you have always felt, even in the moments you struggled to fully trust it. Let it settle in you as a kind of peace that doesn't come from inside the connection itself, but from beyond it, from a witness standing at the closest possible vantage point, observing what you could not always see clearly, and speaking during the rare moments when unspoken truths finally surface and reach the person they belong to. Stay close here, because what you are learning is how to receive testimony from unexpected places, how to trust the confirmations that arrive through paths you never planned for, and how to recognize that being seen through the eyes of those who love the person you love is one of the most revealing and powerful forms of being seen there is.